So you want to hear about my exploits as Lord Mayor? Well, where can I start? It's been a crazy year, as people probably are aware. I was nominated and elected as Lord Mayor last year, partway through the year, so I missed the first 4.5 months. Peter Brennan was actually in the position when I came into it. I took over from Peter. You may see a Siamese cat travelling past the screen. He's been in the garden all day, and he's just joined us at the moment. So it's been a very strange year. I tried to cram as much as I possibly could into a short period of time, and just as I was starting to make some ground up, well, COVID hit us obviously. So then we had COVID and all of the issues. Hi everybody. All of the issues that go with COVID, and so then it kind of unwound again. So I was speaking to the mayor, and he said to me, "Would you do another year?" And I was like, "Could I survive another year?" And then I thought, "Yeah, let's do it." So I've been reappointed for another year. But let me talk to you a little bit about myself and my background and why it's so important for me to be Lord Mayor on a personal level, but also on a level from community and society as well. And so I'm a local girl. I was brought up in Liverpool 8 in Belvedere Road. I was born in Peel Street in the Dingle, just by Prince's Park there. And so I grew up in an area in the 60s. My mother was widowed at a very young age and left with 4 children to raise. And it was a difficult time. My father's death was a sudden death, so there was no preparation time. He went to work one morning and just didn't come home again in the evening. And so my mother had to deal with, the bereavement of losing her husband and also having 4 relatively young children as well. And so she had a car, so she was quite progressive then. She had a car, she had a license, and so she embarked on a career so that she could literally look after the children. And she went to work for Davy Liver and Yellow Cabs that were based on Granby Street. And she went in as an operator for the taxi drivers, and she was there for quite some time. And then it dawned on her that, well, I've got a car and I've got a license, and they earn much more money than the operators do. And so she said, "Can I have a job as a driver?" And they said, "Not really, no, because women are operators and men are taxi drivers." And so she just kept on and on at them. And in the end, they just gave in and said, "Okay, you can be a taxi driver." And I remember, with great joy, actually, as a child, she used to drive an old Riley, and it used to have the full seat at the front. And often she'd put me and my brother in the front, on the front seat, and still do the taxi fares as she was taking us to school in the morning. So, I mean, she was quite a progressive woman, and she was quite adaptable, and she was a hard worker, and she was never frightened of challenging the barriers of the day. And so I think she instilled that in me, and she brought me up to say, put your mind to anything, and you can achieve whatever you want, so long as you get your head down, understand what it is you're doing, and just literally get on with it, and don't take no for an answer. And so basically that's what I did. I started life with a disability. I had epilepsy, so quite severe epilepsy when I was young, and I used to suffer from lots of seizures, etc. And so my first years, in formative educational years, I actually attended Underley School, and I was schooled with lots of children who were terminally ill and had some very severe illnesses and diseases, and things like polio was still quite rife at the time. And so there were children who suffered from polio, cancer, all appalling illnesses for young children to have to suffer. But I think that's where I kind of gained my sense of fairness and injustice. And I remember the boys were quite appalling, really, when we were younger. And they were boys being boys, and they'd pull people's pigtails and stuff. But unfortunately, some of the pigtails that they pulled were young girls who had cancer and had chemotherapy, lost their hair. And, they were literally wigs that they were wearing, they were being pulled. So I quite early on started to sort of wing you know, some of the more vulnerable children and stand up for them, and, you know, be a voice for some of the more timid children that I schooled with. I was kind of written off educationally. You know, my parents, well, my mother was told not to expect a great deal from me academically or educationally, because I'd lost so much time in terms of schooling. But I didn't let it stand in my way. I went back into mainstream school, and I went to Granby Street School, and we had a great school there. And you know, I just sort of had a thirst for knowledge. I wanted to learn, so I made sure that you know, I just kept my head down and studied. And then from there on in, I just took every opportunity to learn about life in general, various cultures. I was quite fortunate. My mother remarried when I was 12 years old, and she married a Dutchman, a captain. And so my stepfather, Jan Betzemer, we used to travel around the world. So 6 weeks holidays, we used to all get on board the ship and off we'd go to strange and weird and wonderful places. So I had a really good opportunity to travel around and see different cultures and different lifestyles, etc. And so I went into education. I was passionate about education. I went into education, then I went into teaching adults and young people. And then I went on to work for a number of government initiatives. And so things like I managed jobs, education and training programs, you know, access to employment programs. And then I had a chance encounter with somebody who offered me the job for Lord Scarman. And so I was the person who delivered the first trainee social entrepreneurs program in the UK for Lord Scarman. And that was back in the early 90s. And so I was working with inner city children and trying to convince them that, you know, functioning within the grey economy was not necessarily the right way to be. They were all entrepreneurs. I don't know how social they were at the time, but we had a really successful program working with inner city kids and getting them off the streets and getting them to put the natural sort of business acumen and aptitude in place. And they went on to do wonderful things. After a number of years working around employment, we had Objective 1, the European funding came into play. So I was quite able to take advantage of every bit of education, and you know, and I did. And then I carried on working around the European Regional Development Fund, the structural funds, and demystifying, you know, the criteria around that. It wasn't simple, it was quite difficult. I went on to do access to law, and I studied contract and tort, which enabled me to decipher the reams and reams of paper that used to come with European funding. And then I became disillusioned with the programmes. The government programmes seemed great in theory, but in terms of practice, we always had the same results. We continued to fail lots and lots of people over and over again. And so that's when I made a decision to go into politics. I'd been chairing Granby Toxteth Partnership with Gideon Benthoven. I'd been working around access to law and access to sociology and psychology. And so I thought it's time for me to go into politics and see if I can actually have an impact on how we deliver programs in inner cities. So in 2006, after doing an MP shadowing scheme with Operation Black Vote, which was a national programme, I was given the opportunity to stand in Prince's Park. And it's very, very rare for a politician to have a choice about where they stand. So, and it's even more rare to stand in the city that you've been, the part of the city that you've been born and raised. And so I embraced that with open arms. So in 2006, I was elected for Prince's Park Ward. And so I'm now in my 4th term. I actually was quite naive when I was elected in 2006, because I believed I could transform politics overnight. I quickly realised that it was going to be a longer and arduous journey than I expected in the beginning. And so all these years later, you know, I'm still working for equality, you know, for changing how we function as a society. And so I went on to chair culture, tourism and sport. I've sat on all of the education select committees, employment select committees, you name it. I've done the rounds. I also sat on the planning committee for 7 years. Very strange thing about planning. Nobody ever volunteers for planning committee. They have to be frog marched into the position. And so when I turned up at committee services and requested that I would be allowed to go on planning, they thought I was very strange indeed. However, I loved every minute of it. And I think every councillor should do at least 12 months on a planning committee because it gives you a broader sort of perspective of the city and how it works and all the internal ranklings and how the city actually functions. I then became mayoral lead for equality about 4 years ago now. I'd always been pushing for a cabinet member's position to be created for equality. We'd never had an equality position in the history of the city. We have cabinet members, but they never ever agreed for an equality position to be a cabinet member. So the furthest I could go was mayoral lead for equality. Now, the difference between mayoral lead and cabinet member is significant. As mayoral lead, you get very little support in terms of administration, research, etc. It's literally a one-woman show. As a cabinet member, on the other hand, you get all the officer support that you need, all the research support, and so you can make some ground quite easily and quite quickly. So a little bit disillusioned when the position for Lord Mayor came up. It was a difficult situation for me because it was on the back of a bit of a, it wasn't a very nice situation with Peter. And so I really had to deliberate over whether the choice to go forward for me was the right thing to do. And it really was a double-edged sword for me because on one hand, I wanted to take the position because I wanted to continue with the work around equality. And one thing I realised is that as Lord Mayor, it does open doors to sit down and have some really poignant conversations with people. But then the other hand was, do I really want this position under these circumstances? So it was like, I couldn't do right for wrong. I was going to upset some people for taking it, and I was going to I would have upset people if I didn't take it. Anyway, I chose to sort of seize the moment and turn a negative into a positive. And so that's how I became Lord Mayor. I quite quickly chose the theme because every Lord Mayor every year chooses a theme. So it was kind of second sense that it would be around equality for all. And so my equality is around equality for all the equality strands. Whether it's our LGBT, transgender, disability, gender, very much around, how we function as a society. And the reality for me is that I'm a huge human rights advocate, and I always have been, probably because of my sort of childhood and some of the barriers that I had to overcome at a young age. And also, the situation with my mother having to bring children up on her own. My mother was also a huge advocate. She fought against the slum landlords in the 1970s, and she went on to Granada Report, and she played merry hell with the slum landlords and caused an awful fuss. And I remember that well. But she had that. That was an innate part of her value and belief system. A sense of fairness. So I think I kind of got that from her. I think in terms of being Lord Mayor, I have been able to achieve a great deal in a short period of time. I set up the 201 Club, which is about businesses joining the Lord Mayor's charities. But it's not just about finances. It's not built on monetary gains at all. You have to pay £1,000 to be a member of the club. But that's not really why I set it up. I set it up because I wanted to have some significant change in terms of the companies in the city. And further afield, I've got companies from the Vale of Evesham, all up and down the country. So it's not just Liverpool or Merseyside. But for me, the most important thing is what people bring to the table in terms of creating opportunities for employment and conversation about the barriers to employment. and giving our young people an opportunity to experience something that's completely life changing for them as well. And so it's not just about the cash; it's about the commitment. And I must admit, it was a lot more. It was a lot more successful than I ever anticipated. I managed to get both football clubs on board, which was great because they're both so competitive. They both wanted to be better than the other, which was nice, a nice injection of good old-fashioned competitiveness. And so it's worked really well. The other charities that I have under the Lord Mayor, and I haven't changed the charities, I've got to keep them for the second year. And I think that that's important as well. One of them is Amadudu Women's Refuge, which deals with women and children fleeing domestic violence. A lot of people don't know about Amadudu, but they do a great deal of work, and they've been consistent over many years. I've got Merseyside Somali Association, another little known community, although they've been part and parcel of Liverpool for many, many decades. Quite a solitary community. They do keep themselves to themselves. They came here as seamen, in the 40s, etc., and stayed. But quite an insular community, but a lovely community as well, very supportive with it amongst themselves. So it was an opportunity to raise the profile of them as well. And then Liverpool City Region Pride, well known now, going from strength to strength, still need that local support here in Liverpool. And that also includes our transgender community as well. If you are really probably in the scheme of things, a newer emerging sort of community in terms of our LGBTQIA. So they need a little bit more support than most. And then obviously Anthony Walker Foundation. And the work with G, who I just is like one of my role models. She's just an extremely, she is such a role model, an ability and for forgiveness and to do positive things after such a negative experience is just never ceases to amaze me. And so I kept Anthony Walker Foundation. It was one of Peter Brennan's charities, and I took it over from Peter. And I've kept them for another year because I think in terms of equality within the city and breaking down those barriers and sort of initiating some very with companies and individuals about how to once and for all eliminate the racism and the discrimination from this city. And be, the city that we want to be, a leader in our field in every single way. But unless we challenge the discrimination, then it's going to hold us back. And so that's where I'm going to continue this year. I'm going to reach out to as many people as possible. I'm just bowled over. I've been completely embraced by every section of the city, all communities. And it's been really wonderful because there is people do want to understand different faiths and cultures, but they want to do it in a way where they feel as though they're in a safe space, to ask the questions that they wouldn't normally ask. And the one thing I say is about language. Language is very important. And the amount of people I speak to and they're having the conversation because they say to me, I don't know what language to use. Do I call you a coloured person or a black person? And these kinds of things that are easily, we can get over them quite easily, but there's such huge barriers to people having an open and honest dialogue. And so being able to break some of those things down is just as equally as important as working with the employers and getting them to get on board in terms of, giving us some visibility in the city and certainly across all the professions. And so I think that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I'm more than happy to take questions if you've got any questions.